Thank you so much, everyone, and hearty welcome to this particular session. I am Malavika Binny. I'm very, very excited to introduce to you our work on goddesses of South Asia. To just set the ball rolling, maybe Professor Mahalakshmi can tell us about what spurred our interest on this particular theme.
Yeah, thank you so much, Malvika. And thank you to the organizers for having me here. Um, my interest in goddesses actually stems from the personal. And I think as a feminist, the personal is the political, as a slogan that came up in the late 60s, was very much a part of the feminist movement in the 70s. This is something that that really resonates with all of us who are feminists. And as a child growing up in a very orthodox, Brahminical household, something that always struck me was that on the one hand, we were talking about the goddesses as our Kuladevis, and in my family there was this whole thing about Kamakshi Amman being the Kuladevi. And at the same time, there was so much so many taboos that women were made to follow, that they could not come when they were menstruating, they could not touch certain things, they could not be in certain places, and so on. And it was that contradiction really that moved me initially to anger. And it was from that place of anger that I started getting curious. But I also had another kind of personal that led me to my work on goddess, and that was about how the women in my family, my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, who I was fortunate enough to grow up with, all of these women actually, when they invoked the goddess, even if it was something very Brahminical like the Lalita Sahasranamam and so on, when they invoked the goddess, they seemed to be totally in a trance or moved by it. They would go into another plane. And that always surprised me and made me wonder at what is it that's really spurring them on. So in a sense, it is from there that I actually went to, I thought about working on the goddess. And it was also because of the fortuitous chance of being a student of history and reading this wonderful work by Didi Kosambi, who's actually a mathematician by training, but also a Sanskritist, also someone who knew his Pali and Prakrit very well, and who wrote so much on early Indian history, but especially this work of his called Myth and Reality. In that work, the way in which he talks about goddesses and how goddess worship must have come into existence, that really set me off in terms of my research on the goddess traditions.
Wonderful. I, on the other hand, I come from a Dalit Bahujan background, and both my parents, while I was growing up, they were atheists, though one of them actually turned back to religion after a while. So we had very few discussions about goddesses, but whenever you had a discussion about God, it was always in the male form, and I would constantly wonder why you were only talking about God as with a male pronoun, or why are you always personifying God as male. But then once I started doing my PhD, I kind of moved towards the history of science, and I was looking at healing traditions, particularly that of Ayurveda, Irava Vaidyam, and Kalari Vaidyam. So I went off on a different tangent, but I am someone who kind of stumbled into goddess traditions, because when you're looking at early healing traditions, for instance, there's this very close association between misfortune, misery, disease, death, and the feminine. So you have references to Alakshmi, Moodevi, Jeshta, and mostly when you have any reference to fetuses in general being aborted or miscarriage, there's always this reference to goddesses like Parnashabari. So that kind of made me wonder, what is this connection between gender and misery, or gender and diseases in particular? And when you look at the medieval record on healing traditions, particularly South Asian healing traditions, you have references to goddesses like Shitala, or in the south you have the Mariamman. And in the colonial record, much later, from the 18th century onwards, you have several references to hook swinging, which was associated with the Mariamman tradition as well as the Sitala tradition. And invariably, because in the colonial record, you see almost all of this. So you have these I might even say this huge descriptive accounts of rituals of Mariamman and rituals of Shitala, rituals associated with hook swinging, their festivals, their myths, but almost all of them are refracted through a very colonial Orientalist lens. And in many ways, it also justified the very colonial understandings or perceptions about India being backward and superstition. So there was this link between the colonial gaze and the way that goddesses were represented in colonial material. So that was my entry point into goddesses studies. And of course, I had a set of brilliant women and men who were already working on the goddess tradition, and it was kind of a wonderful coincidence as well as a wonderful convergence. So if you're looking at goddess tradition, some of the things that Professor Mahalakshmi has already spoken about, how D.D. Kosambi kind of talks about the possibility of a pre-Aryan set of goddesses who might have been there, who might have also, which also might indicate a matrilineal tradition of worship or matrilineal tradition of inheritance patterns in India before Aryan migration to India. That was also a hook for me. But what also people don't realize is this close relation between maybe feminist studies and goddess studies, because goddess studies kind of gives us an entry point into questions of representations, questions of paradoxes within Brahmanical patriarchy and elsewhere. For instance, you have evidence of goddesses being worshipped in the same cultural context where you have the worst forms of gendered violence, questions of women's autonomy, particularly that of bodily autonomy, and then within the goddess tradition you also see a celebration of sexuality, a celebration of female bodily processes and so on. And they're all most of them are also located within highly patriarchal context. So it kind of gives us an opportunity to explore what seemingly seems to be a paradox, but you know, you also have complex negotiations at work, complex reconciliations at work, and the work through through the exploration of many cultural contexts also looks at many of these paradoxes, many of these representations.
Yeah. Yes, and Malvika, to add to what you said about the stereotyping and particular ways in which, say, goddess traditions have been overlooked or marginalized, you know, in the Indian context, something very interesting is these images that you have across the Deccan. And also in other parts through central India and even touching eastern India, these are images of a squatting female figure. She's squatting with her knees splayed apart, and there is no head. She has a lotus on top as the head, and you can clearly see her vagina. It's very pronounced and it is parted. Yeah, you can actually see that. Now, for the archaeologists who were looking at this, they called this Lajja Gauri. So you can see how our own stereotyping of a figure like that as being a Lajja Gauri. Lajja can here mean both shame as well as shameless. So in that sense, so they're saying, yes, there's a Devi here, because in local worship, in the villages where they were finding these, people were still worshipping them. And that is what is so interesting, that doesn't matter whether in patriarchal societies, you know, the dominant or the hegemonic narrative may be one which looks down upon this, which says that this is of a shameless woman and so on. For the people who are worshipping her, she continues to be so important. They retain that reverence for that deity. And I was on fieldwork last year in Telangana, and this year as well. I went just a month ago. But when I went last year to this very important tantric site, the earliest inscriptions go back to the 7th century at this site. And there you have lots of tantric imagery. You have a tantric yogini who is actually the main draw for the people. That place is called Jogulamba, and it is at Alampur. Now, this place had some very prominent Lajja Gauri images, so-called Lajja Gauri. Let me call her Nagnika, okay? The naked one. Let me call her that. And the one that was actually in the premises of the temple, of the main Shiva temple. So 9 Shiva temples come up in this area, which were meant for tantric rites. Now the one in the main Shiva temple, the Balabrameshwara temple, which had this, in recent times, out of some great wisdom, people decided to just build a wall around that place where the image was, so you can barely see it. It's like, you know, sometimes you have, or like a train, a train toilet, where you barely have enough space. It's that kind of space. You know, there's nothing, not an inch that you can move this way or that way. There's a wall that's come up, and there's a door, and it's shut and locked. As a result of which, when I went on my fieldwork last year, I didn't actually get to see this. I thought, you know, it had been taken away to the museum or something. Then I realized from the archaeological report and the museum reports that no, it was not in the museum, it was in the site. So I went back this time and I saw it. And now what they have decided in the wisdom is, because it might create some controversies and furors, that's why they will lock it up. But they'll open it up on Tuesdays and Fridays for only women to come and worship. I'm okay with that, because apparently this was something that was primarily a women-centric worship. What do the women do? I was able to record it, so it was just amazing. The women come there, they bring butter with them, and you're not allowed to see them actually performing this ritual. No mantras, no chanting, no, you know, hullabaloo, and so on. It's just the butter. They go around the image, and then they apply the butter onto the vagina. Then they bow before the image between the splayed legs and then ingest the butter. These are mostly childless women, and they are coming here to seek the blessings of Nagnika, who is a fertility symbol. And by taking in that butter, they believe that they will be blessed with a child. That is the kind of power or the hold of the goddess in the imagination of the people who are worshipping her at the folk level. But for the colonial archaeologists, she became the shameless woman, Lajja Gauri, right? So you have many other such. In the European context also, the earliest figures that we have in the European context are these little figures, which are female figures with big breasts, if you look at them. And fortunately for me, I don't shame very easily, but I can see my mirror image here, in her. Nice big stomach. Yeah, again you can see the pudenda, you can see the vagina that is marked out. She's a standing figure, short stubby legs and hands and so on, no prominent facial features. What did the archaeologists do? They called her the Venus of Willendorf. We don't know if she was a goddess. Okay, but the very fact that from Germany going right into Russia, you have a whole number of sites which have given us these images, suggests that there was some cultic importance attached to this figure, who may have been conceived of as a mother goddess. She may have just been conceived of as a, powerful, supernatural female figure and so on. But we have many such instances that are there in history. So really it's, out of these kinds of curiosities and interests that one embarked on the study of goddesses, and fortunately for me, having students like Malavika as well as so many others who were able to explore various kinds of regional goddesses, religions also. For instance, in Buddhism and Jainism, we generally think of Buddhism and Jainism as primarily being religio-philosophical systems. But within these, there were changes that came about, and especially in Mahayana Buddhism, you have many, goddesses who suddenly come in. They are not incidentally, very high in the hierarchy. There are hierarchies that are created within Buddhism and Jainism, and it's there that you have then that the goddesses coming in at a lower level. But what is very interesting is that these are goddesses, whether in Buddhism or in Jainism, of wisdom, of knowledge. So whether it is Pragya Paramita in the Buddhist tradition, whether it is Angavidya in the Jain tradition, you have so many goddesses like this. And some of these are mentioned in this book that Malavika and I have edited along with Megha Yadav, called Goddesses of South Asia, Texts and Transformations.
10 kilometers from here, I think less than 10 kilometers from here, you have a Mariamman shrine. I think it's called Parayanur Bhagavati Mariamman shrine. And there, and my research started off when I went there for it had something to do with a friend's family occasion. And I saw that you had non-Brahmanic priests there. And it was not just that you had non-Brahmanic priests, they were wearing a punul. And they were wearing the punul only for that particular liminal period, or particularly for that festive occasion. And they were also wearing these red skirts, not the mundu. They were wearing red skirts and they had bangles on. So this kind of caught my attention. I was like, oh my God, you have Mariamman there, and Mariamman is being worshipped using the Lalita Sahasranama, but at the same time, you also have gender trouble at work here. You have gender fluidity at play here. And then when the hymns were being sung out, there were also these Tamil hymns which were sung, there were Malayalam hymns, and constantly Mariamman was also referred to as Aanaragi, the goddess with masculine beauty, or goddess with handsomeness. So for me, that was very, very significant, because there was also this possibility of curing the goddess, and also looking at possible ways in which the goddess could be understood, or goddess worship could be understood as giving space for maybe non-Brahmanic priesthood, including the priesthood of women to come in. Because when I looked at colonial records as well as anthropological material from Kottayam, from Alappuzha, and also from places in Tamil Nadu, you could also see female priestesses who were referred to also as pujaris. So you do have these possibilities of refracting goddess traditions in multiple ways. And Trisha, in our work, for instance, has looked at the process of prognostication. And this particular process itself is understood to be feminine. So prognostication is understood to be feminine, and all those goddesses, Jaina goddesses, who are associated with prognostication, they are also understood to be feminine in nature. But when during a later period you have the emergence of other female deities, these earlier goddesses, they kind of get eclipsed. And then you also have works like that of Anisha, where she looks at the ways in which the goddess is represented in the contemporary period. For instance, you have Kamala Harris. If you remember a year or two back when you had the US elections, you had the previous election, sorry. The previous vice presidential election, she was represented as Durga with 8 hands. And this actually led to a debate on X on whether how to understand the goddess, and what kind of representations are understood to be representations which are okay, and whether you can actually look beyond certain representations as representations which might not be palatable to an Indian audience here, or to a largely Hindu diaspora. So those are also some of the questions that we take up, because we also felt that it was important to touch upon contestations within the goddess traditions, rather than only look at certain kind of, of course you do have deviant representations of the goddess, you also have very diverse representations of the goddess. So we were also trying to not look at the goddess tradition in a monolithic way, because the kind of diversity that you see in goddess traditions, there's no way that we can collapse them together.
Yeah. And to add to this point, you know, who is the one who can speak for the goddess? Who can say that I will decide that this is how my goddess has to be worshipped? And this is something that you find has been in the public sphere for a while now. When M.F. Hussain painted goddesses, we know the kind of outcry against that, saying that, you know, he cannot, he doesn't have the right to speak for our traditions or represent our goddesses in particular ways. And I don't know how many people know this, but one of the great demands of one ideologue of the RSS called Dinanath Batra was that, you know, in the textbooks there was, I think something in the lower class textbooks, there was an assignment where children were being asked to go online and look at modern Indian painters and their work. And he said, take M.F. Hussain off this list because we don't want our children's minds to be corrupted, right? So who can speak for the goddess? That becomes a very big question. Satyajit Ray, the great Satyajit Ray, when he made his wonderful film called Devi, he was attacked. And that story, as you know, is about how the father-in-law has this vision of his daughter-in-law as a Devi, and places her on a pedestal and takes her life away, literally squeezes the life out of her in that process, right? So, and it was a beautiful film because it was making us think about how we visualize and how we iconize certain figures, certain principles. And that's where the typology is then, you know, where we have typologies of the good wife who is represented, you know, in the Dampatya Jivanam. So you will always bless somebody as a Sita or as, you know, you say things like Lakshmi or Parvati, and these are the goddesses, at least in the Brahminical system, that are invoked to bless somebody. You'll never say, be like a Durga, be like a Kali, right? That's not the blessing we give our women. So it's this. Yeah, maybe we should, of course. And that is why then one of the essays in this volume was really very important for all of us as editors and also as part of this collective that came out with the book. And this was an essay on a sati. A sati that happened in our times, the sati of Roop Kanwar, where a young woman, after her husband died, was made by the family to become a sati, right? There were women's groups that went in, there were reports that were written, there were newspaper reports and coverage that indicated that the so-called voluntariness of this act needed to be probed, that it appeared that it was not really a voluntary act. So, you know, so there were questions that were being raised. But then the outcry that, you know, that followed from the community saying that you cannot say these things, you Western educated feminists and so on, this is how women in our community think, right? And so then within days you had a Chabutra coming up, you had a Sati Mata temple, you had posters coming up, an entire market came out around this tragic death of a woman. Maybe we should say, call it out as it is. It was a murder, right? But what was also interesting for us is we had to have really a lot of discussion with our publishers as well, and we all understand the kind of pressures that are there, right? But at the same time, could we sacrifice our autonomy as researchers, as historians, as scholars? You know, how much do we allow the so-called communities' wishes and desires and aspirations, you know, by talking about the satis and the greatness of the women in their community and so on? how much of this are we to allow to impinge on our autonomy as researchers? This became a question, and fortunately, our publishers were very supportive, and we were able to publish that particular article. But I think that these are, and there's this controversy that came up over Leena Manimehalai's film called Kali. And in that film, she takes on this queer female figure. Kali enters into this. So she called it a performative drama, a documentary or something like that, where it comes into her as the maker of the film itself, and she's walking around and looking at things and commenting, and she's smoking and so on, and wears the pride flag or something like that. But that drew so much flack. So much so that the organizers in Canada had to pull it out of that exhibition that they were holding and so on. So these really led us to place at the center the issue of who can speak for religion, who can speak for goddesses. And anyway, is there a static goddess tradition? Goddesses have changed and they have come in. In recent times, we have a Santoshi Mata who came up just on the base of a film. We have Corona Mata who has come up after, Corona. We have a Malaramma who is talked of by this very well-known ethnographer, Reverend Whitehead. He has this little book on village gods of South India, in which he refers to a Malaramma. So, a disease goddess, as Malavika has also pointed out. You had many village goddesses, but once malaria came into the picture, we had a new goddess called Malarama who also there. So, it's not static. And by claiming that, in our tradition, this is how we see things, we are bringing in that notion of a fixed goddess. There is no fixed goddess. The goddesses change over time. The attributes they have change over time. Their mythologies change over time. Their iconographies change over time. And that's what is so fascinating about that subject.
Talking about the change in iconographies and particularly talking about Corona Mata. So we had one of our editors who actually came out with a paper on Corona Mata, and while I was going through that paper, I had a conversation with my better half, Dr. Tintu Joseph, and he was telling me that Corona Mata is the Corona Mata of North India, but you have a Corona Mata even before Corona in Thrissur, right? And that Corona Mata was titled as Corona Mata because she has a crown. And Corona actually means crown. And people started visiting that particular church of Corona Mata, assuming that she is supposed to cure Corona. So you also have this very interesting intersections happening. But the question of assimilation, for instance, quite often when we think of goddess traditions, we only kind of think of goddess traditions being within the larger pale of Brahmanism or within the larger quote-unquote Hindu traditions. But you have female divinities, female deities also in other traditions. Now, for instance, I don't think Keralites have to be told about this because we are someone who know about the Bhima Palli in Trivandrum, which is named after Bhima Umma. In Kannur, where I come from, you have the Munupettumma Dargah, which has the biggest urus in Kannur. So you also have these traditions as well. Plus you have so many mythologies about Mother Mary traditions in the coastal region of Kerala. For instance, one of the most famous myths might be that she stopped of all people, Tipu Sultan's onslaught to Kerala by bringing snow. So that is why she is referred to as the Manyumada. Now, snow in Kerala might be fantastical to think about, but at the same time, it is also fascinating for us to explore this idea of how particularly gendered mythologies and how they change over time. And particularly, in economics, we have this, like the glass ceiling theory, we have the glass cliff theory, where in times of crisis, you turn towards the feminine, and particularly towards the intersection of sacrality with the feminine. And within mythologies, whenever you have these kinds of shifts happening, whether it's a cultural shift happening or crisis happening, you also have a redefining, reinvention, reinterpretations of goddess mythologies. So on the question of assimilations, I think in the introduction you have mentioned quite a bit about it.
Yes, yeah, you've already mentioned the Kerala context, but one of the important ways in which there is an assimilation that you can see within the Christian understanding of some thing that is supra human is in the way in which the Kannis are talked of. So, in many instances across Tamil Nadu, you have the Kanni worship that is there, and of course, the greatest Kanni worship is Velangani. That we have. So, Kanni now is a very important concept right from the Sangam traditions. The idea of a virgin goddess or a young goddess on the brink of sexual awakening. That's what it really implies. That is something that is very much there in the traditions of the region, and how beautifully that is assimilated into the Christian tradition. There's one very interesting tradition in Bengal, which is in the Sundarbans region. And here it is an Islamic quote unquote goddess that we are looking at, who is called Bonobibi. And Bonobibi is the goddess of the forest. And she is seen as being blessed by Bibi Fatima and being given these, that the daughter of the Prophet that is, and being given these powers. And because of those powers, she's able to ward off all kinds of evils, and that's how people worship her. And very interestingly, her adversaries in the forest are Narayani and her son. I'm forgetting Vaishno Dev or something like that. I'm forgetting the exact name, but Narayani is the mother and son duo. And finally, Narayani abandons the son and joins forces with Bonobibi. So it's very interesting how across the subcontinent, we just have to look more carefully, and we will find so many instances of assimilation of this kind that are there. And one interesting one is where within the great Vaishnava sacred center, which is Sri Sailam, we have a temple, a shrine to Tulukanachiyar. And there is a story, legend about how when the region was sacked by Malik Gafur and so on, and idol was taken away, and the daughter of the Sultan fell in love with that idol. And she wanted, she always wanted to be close to that idol. And when at a later point of time, the Brahmins went there to petition and to bring back that idol, this young girl was distraught, and so she also came in, and she was then given a place as a nachiyar, as a spouse of the goddess within. So this is what is so fascinating about the goddess tradition. We need to look at the historical transformations that take place, but also assimilations that take place, which is what renders these traditions so diverse and so rich in terms of the meanings and the values they hold for society.
I think that's pretty much the time that we have. Now we need to move on to audience questions. But before that, I'd just like to tell you that we also have these wonderful essays on female deities from a comparative study of female deities from the Zendavasta and the Rig Veda by Prerna Roy. You have, I think, a very favorite theme for Malayalis on the Devi and the Mahisha by Sneha Ganguly. So it's a work which I'm very sure you will find interesting for a variety of reasons, whether you're interested in goddess worship, or whether you're interested in feminist studies, or whether you want to look at issues of curing, issues of representation, issues of intelligibility, issues of contestations. I think the work will offer you a little bit for everyone. So shall we move on to the audience questions now?
So how do we, and this is a overall question reflection as you will take it, where the concept of the goddess is so limited within most spiritual traditions, definitely Hinduism, and then you have things like the sexuality, or, you know, there's the goddess of the periods, I forget the name, you know, somewhere in Assam. Isn't there a temple? Yeah, yeah. So how do we, in this society, broaden it a little bit? I mean, we talk about it. We can talk about it in these spaces, right? But for the broader audience or population, that then becomes, oh, you're defaming or you're upsetting me. How do we navigate that?
Well, I think largely at the local level, there is already an understanding of that in the sense that, you know, we separate things. What we say in a certain public where we are talking about our Hinduness, there is a certain way in which we behave there. But then when we talk about our local traditions, we go back to our kavas, we go back to our village deities, our kula devis, and so on. So I think there are ways in which within society negotiations do take place. But I think the larger question and the more substantive issue that you are raising is that somewhere both in terms of the institutionalized religions and the way in which they portray what is dominant within that, as well as in academic circles. Let me tell you that the goddess studies part is a very small part of you know, academic discussions on religion. What we do need to do is have much more a discussion and research, and forums like this certainly give us that opportunity to do it. So one's really thankful for this. There is someone in the audience who actually, when he was doing his undergraduate, read a book of mine called The Making of the Goddess Kottravai Durga in the Tamil traditions, which was on Sangam goddesses. And he contacted me then, and since then, this young man, Seshan, has been going around Kerala and parts of Tamil Nadu trying to identify, you know, local cult spots. And I have been encouraging him to get into research. So, you know, we do need much more research of this kind that is taking place. But I think that also within institutionalized religion, what has happened is there are certain spokespersons, there are certain votaries who project a certain view, which is why then Nagnika has to be, you know, who's called Yellamma, incidentally, in the Deccan region. And now they want to kind of lock her up and really not have people see that part. She's really, it's a little shameful, shameless and shameful for us to actually look at these things. So we need to have some kind of a dialogue there as well.
I think it also works the other way around, because by talking about the goddess, you also bring in questions of sexuality, you bring in questions about menstruation, as you clearly mentioned, and that kind of becomes a conversation starter. And that also offers us an excellent entry point to also discuss about other issues that women face in general, and particularly when you have issues of intersectional oppression, for instance, happening. So those are also great conversation starters. But as Professor Mahalakshmi mentioned, though the discussion has started and has been around for about a century or so, I don't think it has reached the public discourse yet, on the one hand, and even within the academia, there's a certain kind of siloing that one witnesses, and we have tried to constantly push the boundaries. Women in academia have done that for a very long time, and we'll continue to do that.
Hi. Yeah, so I thought about this question when you mentioned Santoshi Mata, as you were talking about Corona Mata and all that. So, so in Kerala also, trans communities worship Santoshi Mata, and usually it's said that trans communities in Kerala specifically do not have that parivar system and all that, but that's not exactly true. What do you think about like the relation between the worship of Santoshi Mata in Kerala by the trans community and of the Guru Shishya systems of trans people in other parts of India?
For me, I think it is ingenious of the trans community in Kerala to take up Santoshi Mata as the primary goddess. There are also other goddesses because you think about it. What if they had taken Durga? What if they had taken of all people Mother Mary? Wouldn't all hell have been unleashed on them? So they very cleverly took a goddess who was kind of invented, I think 1990s, 2000s, which came in one of 1990s, early 1980s, which was part of a movie culture. And then you also had these horrible Hindi serials which popularized Santoshi Mata mythology. And those are also ways in which the goddess get reinterpreted, I feel. And I think people have, and I on my side, I feel that people have the liberty to do so. So the trans community's embracel of Santoshi Mata and sort of Santoshi Mata becoming a cultural icon of the trans community in Kerala kind of shows the ways in which queer people have negotiated and pushed back at heteronormativity using cultural resources. And I think it's a very significant move on their side. I do have a research student who's working on mapping Santoshi Mata traditions in Kerala along with other kind of queer traditions, and also look at the rituals associated with Santoshi Mata. At every step you would see that there is a certain kind of invention of rituals, invention of tradition at work, where the trans identity of the person takes center stage, and then it is closely linked to the divinity of the goddess. And you have gender fluidity at work there, but at the same time there is this very subtle and maybe not so subtle challenging of heteronormative patriarchy if you closely interrogate the ritual. So I think it's hats off to them. It was ingenious of them to actually take up this particular goddess as the goddess of the trans community here.
We have time for one last question. Last question.
Okay, this is this is as a response to what Malavika Binny said. So I also come from Kannur, and I've been hearing the Monuvettumma legend and as well as the Bhimapalli one. So in these places, the women, their tombs, the tombs of women or the graveyards of women who were once walking, talking people, they are made sacred and celebrated in a way, in a tomb, in such a, custom. So in the Muslim community, there are limitations and limitations regarding whether a woman should or woman can go to a graveyard and, visit a graveyard, do ziyarat, and meet, even if it's a brother or husband, or especially if it's not a close relative, they can't visit a graveyard, right? So is it because these women, is it are these purely legends, or is it because these women are turned to tombs or turned to goddesses that they are allowed, like that it is allowed for us to visit these graveyards, or the limitations just go away? Like, is it because, what do you think about this?
I think it's a mix of both, because these tombs, we do have several instances of tomb veneration from Malabar to Dakshina Kannada, and a lot of these are of female Sufi saints. So when you look at the records, we do see a bit of evidence of women actually visiting and offering sacrifices, and mostly it is in connection with the fulfillment of vows. Maybe a child being born in the family, particularly a male child being born in the family, so on and so forth. So that is where it becomes a bit ironical. But then you have instances of women visiting the tombs, instances of women sort of acting like guardians of the tombs. So you do have that, but once you move towards, let's say, late 20th century, not just late 20th, early 20th century, these instances come to be mediated through male agency. So there will invariably be a male person who's in charge of the dargah, and the sacrifices will be mediated through that person. Or the Sufi female saint or a male saint will be invoked in other ways. So for instance, there will be a threshold up to which women can come, and after the threshold you will only have male participation in the ritual. So those kind of shifts are also very, very significant. Where, on the question of female agency, I think it's very much there because women are still participants in it, but that the level of participation, unfortunately, I think has come down in the recent years, if that was what you were asking. It's a very recent thing that there's a shift where, you know, women are disallowed from entering into those shrines. It's not just something which is happening in Kerala, but I think it's happening all across.